Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for being here today. We know that there are a lot of things going on in town and family things, other things you could be doing, but so we really appreciate you taking time out today to help us recognize and honor one of Durham's finest and living legacies in Durham. I am pleased and proud for the last few months, the last 6 months or so, to have worked with the Durham Library in the North Carolina collection. My role is to help expand the collection. We want all types of materials. We're particularly interested in ensuring that we have a very rich, full collection of African American materials, things from all over Durham, Durham County, Durham City. So if you or family members or other people that you know have things that you think would enrich this collection, photographs, other documents, programs, and as you will hear today from Mr. Bryant's collection, everything, it's a vast variety of materials that we know now and in the future will be important for folks to understand what Durham is all about, how the community expanded, and we want you to become a part of that. You can, later today, if you haven't already, please pick up a brochure on your way out. There's some information about where you can go online and see some of the collections we currently have. We have a number of things already digitized, so you can just click and online see some of these things. Right here in this room, we have a few people who have family and organizational materials. I see Eileen Watts-Welch here. We have some of her family's materials. Others here who have some things already in the collection. Anybody else? We need more. Your name, sir? I'm sorry. Oh, yes, Mr. Edmonds. Yes, we have the full set of the Carolina Times is completely digitized, so you can access that online. The time to preserve these materials is now. I'm at that age in my life where I'd like to hold on to things, but I know that my son is not very interested in those things that I've held on to. And I'm very proud to say that, I've been involved in Durham for about 30 years now, and I actually am starting a collection here. So that, all that to say that you don't need to be at a certain profession or station in life. We're interested in things that document everyday citizens and the everyday Durham. So please feel free to be in touch with me, Lynn Richardson, anybody in the library, and we do have some brochures at the back. Happy to talk with you after this program today, or please feel free to call me at any time. Please enjoy the program today. If you have any questions, ask. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lois. Thank you, Joanne. And thank all of you all for being here. It's a wonderful day to say hello and to applaud a man who has applauded Durham for many, many years. It is my honor she's yelling at me. I need to speak directly into the microphone. Thank you very much, Mrs. Davis. You always seem to have my back. Before we get started and go very far into the program, there are lots of distinguished people here. Okay, good. All right, this is fine. I can really hold it. Okay, this is good. Lots of distinguished people, so all of you all are in. Maybe that's better? Okay, very good. I want to introduce some people who are office holders around. I think I saw my colleague, Don Moffitt, who's right there in the back. We are right there, and right beside him is our county commissioner colleague, Ellen Reckow. And I think from the state level, we see Representative H.M. Mickey Mashaw right over here. I don't know that I see any other office holder right now, but if others come in, we certainly will recognize them along the way. There are some distinguished people here in this audience, and I want to talk a little bit about Mr. Bryant, and to try to deal with it from the standpoint of lots of different segments. And with Mr. Bryant, there are so many segments of life here in Durham. I thought it might be good to go back to the town of Rocky Mount. And there is a gentleman, a distinguished gentleman, former office holder right here, Dr. John Harding Lucas, who is right here on the corner. And he is from the town of Rocky Mount, and he has known Mr. Bryant for a long time. Dr. Lucas, could you come up, if you don't mind, and perhaps say a word or two about your Rocky Mount colleague? And Dr. Lucas has the honor also of being close to Mr. Bryant in terms of not only his Rocky Mount roots, but also the fact that they both belong to White Rock Baptist Church. Okay.
Thank you very much. I knew I was scheduled to make some comments, but I didn't know I would start that early. Thanks to the presiding person and to all of you who have arranged for this program for such a wonderful person. I guess I've known R. Kelly Bryant longer than anyone else present. I've known him over 90 years. Unless someone can challenge that, who's in fact, we were in school together in Rocky Mount. He was a year ahead of me. I graduated in 36 and he graduated in 35. He was a very outstanding leader in the high school, one in whom we all had a lot of respect. If ever we had arguments and things of that sort, we thought he lived so perfectly until he would have to settle the disputes that may occur. We were both interested in scouting, and we were very pleased when Hampton Institute, at that time Hampton University now, chose him as one of our scholarship recipients. And from that institution, he graduated, and he's done a lot of things. Then in Rocky Mount, we both enjoyed a very outstanding teacher that we talk about a lot sometimes. Her name was Anna Brown, who also was one of the founders of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. And he initiated an activity that now has a stone historic marker for her in Rocky Mount. And there are many other things that you know about him that I won't say, so I thought I would mention these things for such. And then I was just thinking, we are sort of in-laws. My sister Ethel married Alexander Bryant, who's in the Bryant family, so the Bryant and the Lucases and the Pools are all very close together and interrelated in a way for such. I would like to say this, he's one friend that I've never heard an ill word about. It's always been praise for R. Kelly Bryant Jr. And I think that's very outstanding. And to live to be almost 100 years of age for such, I think that's a very wonderful thing. Knowing that there are other folk who are going to make comments, I could talk all day about Kelly. We call him Kelly, but I won't say more. He has a wonderful family. We are church members. He's been a leader in the White Rock Baptist Church for many, many years, and a friend, and a real man, if there ever was one. Congratulations to R. Kelly Bryant, a wonderful person and a wonderful example.
Thank you, Dr. Lucas. And you mentioned the person who was one of the founders of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. And I happen to notice over here we have a Hamptonian who has recently was involved with another historical marker for another famous member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, and that was Rose Butler Brown. And the person I'm speaking about, this Hamptonian, is Dr. Caroline Lattimore. Would you just wave your hand over here? I have asked Gloria Dole, I almost said Gloria Dole Thorpe, but Gloria Thorpe Dole to come up and to say just a word about Mr. Bryant's involvement with the Hampton alumni folks right around here. And while she's coming, are there other people in the audience who went to that distinguished institution called Hampton Institute, now called Hampton University? If you did go there, would you please just stand in honor of Mr. Bryant and General Armstrong? Gloria, Mr. Bryant has been involved in lots of your work.
Oh, yes. Hi. On behalf of the National Hampton Alumni Association, Incorporated, of which I am on the national board and a national officer, and the North Carolina region of NHAA, Inc., of which Mr. R. Kelly Bryant served 50 years as treasurer for the North Carolina region. We kept suspending the bylaws so that he could run again and run again and run again. And we do appreciate his service. He is truly an example of service. Part of the Hampton alma mater says, let your life do the singing. And Mr. Kelly Bryant has been an example, has been the epitome of a Hampton alum in that respect. And I do want to congratulate him. I also want to congratulate him because he's my mentor. I just love Mr. R. Kelly Bryant. When I moved back to Durham, he was my inspiration to get involved in the Alumni Association and to give back. He was very big on giving back to the school. And I guess when you think about it, you first come out, you think, you know, you paid your tuition, you gave, you feel like you've given. But he really taught me the true meaning of giving and sharing, and I really want to thank him for that. He's also served as treasurer for the local Durham Chapel Hill chapter for almost 50 years, and we just appreciate your service. We appreciate everything that you've done for our alma mater, our home by the sea, and for the Alumni Association, and for me. Thank you.
Gloria, I remember there's another Hamptonian who was walking in the back here, another elected official, Judge Marsh, who is over there, another Hamptonian. Gloria, when you all used to have local chapter meetings at our home, as Harriet at one point was the president of the local chapter, Mr. Bryant and Mr. Nat White, and many of you remember the wonderful contributions that were made here by Mr. Nathaniel White Sr. Mr. Bryant and Mr. White were always in their element, and they would always tell stories. They would tell stories to try to outdo one another, basically a sort of lying contest. Mr. Bryant always won those contests because he always claimed that he was the one. And let me I'll give you a little context here. General Armstrong was the founder of Hampton, and he founded that institution in 1868. Well, Mr. Bryant was fond of saying that there were photographs around of him holding General Armstrong's horse at the founding of that institution. Of course, then Mr. Nat White would try to come up with something even more outrageous, but clearly they were folks who loved Hampton and who loved all the wonderful things that went with that great institution. Mr. Bryant has had lots of involvement in lots of things here. There's a gentleman named Mr. Nathan Garrett who is here, and I think if he could sort of make his way, I think he's planning to talk a little bit about Mr. Bryant's civic involvement in lots of different aspects of life. Hey, Nathan, good to see you.
Thanks, Eddie, and hello to all my really good friends that I see in the audience. It's really an honor to be here to speak at this event for Kelly, who's been a longtime friend, and Kelly, a real source of inspiration for me, really. Our lives have crossed in many ways. We've mentioned Rocky Mount. We're Eastern North Carolina birthers. I was born 14 years later in Tarboro, about 15 miles down the road from Rocky Mount. Professionally, our paths have crossed. You were an accountant for your professional life, and so was I. As a matter of fact, if I'm not wrong, Kelly, I think you and I actually got to know each other when I joined the team who had been selected to do the director's bank audit for Mechanics and Farmers Bank. Is that correct? That was many years ago, so, okay. And somebody's already mentioned White Rock Baptist Church, 55 years on the trustee board, and I served briefly as the chair of the finance committee. And then, of course, North Carolina Mutual, where you served for 37 years, and I served on that board for 31 years. So it's been amazing. And one other thing, as a historian, that our paths crossed there too, because back in about mid-1970, Kelly, you went on Wanda's show, Black Unlimited, where you talked about the collection of autographs of famous people, shakers and movers in our society, and you collected those. I've often wondered where they are, whether you have deposited them someplace, but an historian, and that's another crossing. But the Paris Street Advocacy group is what I've been asked to speak of particularly. One member who's here is Barbara Lau, and I think I see one or two others who work with that. At any rate, let me just, actually Kelly and I sort of shared leadership positions with the Paris Street Advocacy Group. He as the first secretary and I as the first chairman. But let me give you a little bit more about the advocacy group and Kelly's roles in it. The organization was formed by the Durham City Council, who needed some advice on what to do about refurbishing or revitalizing Paris Street. And of course, Paris Street, Kelly and I worked together on that, but this was an organization of roughly 50 volunteers, and these volunteers met about once a month and so forth, and we tried to help the city in deciding what to do. There were two committees. One was the Economic Development Committee, and they were charged sort of with the responsibility of trying to recruit new businesses to come to Paris Street, also helping people or advising people on how to improve their facades if they're going to be on Paris Street, and finally to help advise the city on how to go about supporting the construction of a tower office building that was going to be located on Paris Street at the corner of Corcoran. And as a matter of fact, there are things still going on with regard to that, and I hope we will hear more about that very soon as things go forward. Then there was the History Committee of the Paris Street Advocacy Group, which was involved with trying to tell the story of Paris Street, Black Wall Street, or as some people said, the center of black capitalism for blacks in the United States. But at any rate, Kelly was on that committee, the History Committee, and as a member of that committee, Kelly helped to develop a variety of ways to tell the Paris Street story to the public, and this included creation of markers about the history, and those markers can be seen on Paris Street right now. Also, he helped in developing panels. Barbara did a great deal of work on this, but helped develop the panels, the stories for the panels, and those panels were portable and were used in the schools of Durham to teach the young people about the Paris Street story. Also, and let me add this, those panels are now located in what is called the Forum on Paris Street, and that forum is there because of the inspiration and advice that Kelly provided in a number of ways. At any rate, let me say this finally, because I know the time is short. He was also the elected secretary, and as such, he was a member of the executive committee of the group. And as such, he interviewed the clients or the candidates who wanted to become staff members to provide staff support for the advocacy group. Kelly, I've thanked you many times in private for being a friend and a mentor to me. But now I'd like to add my thank you publicly. Thank you, Kelly, and bless you for a long time to come.
The banner that you see over here talks about Mr. Bryant's involvement in Paris Street, but also in terms of a black solidarity issue that came about during the height of the civil rights movement. And there were discussions about how indeed the economic power of the African American community could be enhanced and in some ways mobilized, so that it did not necessarily always seem to center on the businesses that were downtown. And they chose at one time, what year was that? 1968, to have a Christmas parade that did not flow down Main Street, but instead down Fayetteville Street. And there you see in that banner Mr. Bryant decked out riding the float with Santa Claus in a very nice bow tie, and he was the secretary to that movement. Many of you have heard Howard Clement talk about this movement. So there were lots of people who were involved, and of course that economic movement did get the attention of merchants here in Durham, and it was a high watermark in terms of trying to make sure that the economic resources of Durham became diversified and shared by people all over this city. So thank you so much, Mr. Bryant, for the work there. Mr. Bryant indeed did work with the Durham Business and Professional Chain and did lots of different work. Some of you may even remember a film, that film is still circulating here in this library, called Negro Durham Marches On. A certain clip of that has Mr. Bryant in there talking about, well, not talking, but he is viewed there as standing up at a meeting of the Durham Business and Professional Chain. So there were lots of things that were going on during those times. I haven't talked to him about that, and I don't know if Representative Michaud would be willing to say just a word or two about that era and the things that were going on, and Mr. Bryant's involvement, your involvement, and others along the way. Could we ask you to come up and share a word or two?
Those were exciting times, Kelly. And when the Black Solidarity Committee for Community Improvement was formed, we had made a decision at that time. We were just coming out of the crux of the civil rights movement at the time. This was after everybody had been arrested for going out to the Howard Johnsons on 50, I mean, all of those things. But we formed that group. And by the way, Kelly, I meant to tell you, Howard Fuller was here in Raleigh the other day and had a chance to talk with him. But his involvement, he got me involved with the Durham Business and Professional Chain. And one year, the year was 1956, and I was in charge of the Durham Business and Professional Chain annual program. And we got together, and I don't know why it happened that way, but it was a very fortunate thing for me. Kelly, if you remember that year, Louis Austin, Richard Harris, and all of those folks were there, and they made this young kid, I was at the time, chairman of that Trade Week committee. We used to have a Trade Week program every week, every October of every year. Well, in 1956, I was put in charge of the program, and I got it in my mind. I said, well, we need to have a big close-up, which would happen over the weekend, big rally and whatnot, to have everybody come in, and we needed a speaker. So where's Ken? Went to your granddaddy and said, Louis Austin. I said, Louis, we need to have a big speaker come in. And I said, I think I can get Martin Luther King Jr. here. I said, I know his brother. He and I were in school together, so let's see. And Louis looked at me, he said, well, we can try it. So we sat there in Louis's office that day and called Montgomery. Now, fortunately, the young lady who was Martin's secretary at the time was a mother of a young lady who was a friend of mine. So, I mean, you know, all these things weave together. But anyway, we talked with Martin that day, and he said he'd be happy to come to Durham. He always wanted to come, and he had never been here. He heard so much about it. But we said, come on. Well, Kelly, I don't know whether, but John Wheeler and Shag and all of them cussed me out. Why are you bringing a preacher in here on a business on a business weekend? I said, well, I thought the man had something to offer. He headed up this big boycott down there in Montgomery and all of that. I said, it'd been nice, you know, it'd been nice to have him. But anyway, we had it over at Hillside High School auditorium. The place was packed. To make a long story short, I lost my program, and one person who had a copy of that program was Kelly Bryant. And Kelly allowed me to make a copy of it. But it was one of those things that the community was actually involved in all the way around. The other thing that came out of it was that I made close friends with Martin at the time, and a lot of things that happened as a result of that. But Kelly, I also remember the 1 o'clock luncheon club. Now that was something else too. We met at the Y on Umstead Street, and anytime you call anybody Mr. or put a title on their name, it cost you a nickel. You had to put the nickel in the pot. But it met at 1 o'clock on Wednesdays. It lasted for 1 hour. Everybody, folks like Emmett Talaferro Brown, pastor of Mount Vernon Baptist Church. But these were things, and Kelly has a complete running history of that. And we really need to take advantage of keeping those papers here, Kelly, and I hope you've made arrangements to put them here in this library. I know you have, but if you ever want to get a rich history, particularly of Black Durham, Kelly is the person to go see. You've done a great job. We appreciate everything you've done. I've talked a little bit more. I could tell you a whole lot more about that, but I'm not going to do it. But Kelly, you have done, especially with the Boy Scouts. My brother, for instance, was an Eagle Scout, went to England on that jamboree back when. And so all of these things have happened. You've made your contribution. You deserve now to take the rest that you really need. And we hope for at least another 50 years out of you, okay? Thank you so much.
I'm glad Mickey mentioned Boy Scouts, but I'm going to hold that for just a moment because I want to let you know that as strong as Mr. Bryant was around issues of black empowerment and making sure that there were issues that stayed in the black community, he was a bridge builder. And it's important for us to talk about bridges, and I'm gonna ask Don Moffitt to get ready, not now, but to come up in just a minute and talk about a certain bridge that we have here in Durham, just briefly. So you got a little bit of time to think about it. But before we do that, I want to talk about the fact that Mr. Bryant worked to make sure that his advocacy for things African American and for Durham in general allowed him to stretch out and to work with people who were not always black. And I want to ask Ms. Jessie Thompson Eustace to come forward now and talk a little bit about a project that she has worked with Mr. Bryant on, and it's a wonderful project called the Gear Street Cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today to speak about my work with Kelly Bryant, because Kelly Bryant, I don't think he meant to be, but he was a great teacher of mine. And I prepared my remarks. They're exactly 4.5 minutes, so I'm just going to pretty much stick with what I wrote down. So if I look at my cards, I hope you'll forgive me. I'm not a professional speaker. I'm a professional teacher, but I'll do the best I can. Thank you. I met Mr. Bryant after taking a class at the Duke Center for Documentary Studies in 2002 with Barbara Lau. It was called Documenting Durham. I mentioned to her that I was interested in doing that class, my class project on Gear Cemetery, and that I'd been informed through inquiries with the city that Mr. Bryant was involved with Gear Cemetery. Barbara Lau suggested I call White Rock Baptist Church. And at White Rock, I found Mr. Bryant's number. Poor Mr. Bryant. As it turns out, I was not the first white lady to contact Mr. Bryant about Gear Cemetery, for he has saved a letter from Mrs. Doris B. Tilley, written in 1985, in inquiry about his knowledge about the cemetery. But I'm getting ahead of myself because when I took Documenting Durham with Barbara Lau, I thought of myself as discovering the cemetery. When I called Mr. Bryant that first time, he agreed to talk with me. He had worked very hard to get the cemetery cleaned up in 1991. There had been many interested stakeholders, many helping hands, articles in the paper, city council agenda items, and many letters written. Mr. Bryant said he felt badly about how the cemetery had become overgrown again. He told me he had collected a folder full of Gear Cemetery-related documents and donated a copy of it to the Southern Historical Collection at UNC. So I went to UNC and I looked up that folder, and then I think I convinced Mr. Bryant that I was serious. So sometime in the spring or early summer of 2003, Mr. Bryant met me at the library here, and we planned to advertise and hold a new meeting for interested parties and stakeholders in June 2003. Mr. Bryant proposed that we call the group Friends of Gear Cemetery. The Friends, a group that was pretty large at the time, successfully lobbied the city of Durham to allocate funds to pay TROSA to rid the cemetery of vines and undergrowth in 2004. It was through listening and taking minutes at these Friends of Gear Cemetery meetings with Mr. Bryant that I came to understand, not through his boasting, which he never does, that Mr. Bryant had a long history of being involved in projects for historic preservation, and that he was in leadership positions and members of several boards, commissions, and committees. As I realized these things, I also came to understand how much patience and tolerance Mr. Bryant had with me. Other things I learned from Mr. Bryant included information about his grandmother, Mrs. Margaret Ruffin Fawcett, who helped start White Rock Baptist Church and donated the first dollar towards its first building. She is buried in Gear. I also learned of Mr. Bryant's grandfather, Mr. Robert Lee Poole, an ex-slave and bricklayer who helped build such buildings as the warehouse at Brightleaf Square. And these peoples, I learned about these people's multi-ethnic heritage, history of slavery and freedom, and as I learned Race is just a cultural construct. In other words, I was educated by Mr. Bryant about American history. Mr. Bryant just didn't outright tell me, as I deserve to be told, that I had a very Caucasian view of American history on a large scale, and my discovery of Geer Cemetery on a small scale. Mr. Bryant revealed to me a little bit at a time the history of the cemetery and his history of trying to preserve it since 1985. He introduced me to others such as Dee Dee Barnes, Denise Rosen, Alan Dew, Carrie McNair, and Dr. Leroy Walker. And finally, Mr. Bryant taught me and led me to understand my interest in Geer Cemetery was not just a passing fancy, but that it is an enduring responsibility. Thank you.
It shows that Mr. Bryant has this net, this whole net of people who he indeed deals with. I want to ask Dr. James Schooler, if he would come forth and talk a little bit about Mr. Bryant's constant involvement trying to make sure that the young people in Durham had a chance to grow and thrive. I want to introduce one of the earliest African-American Eagle Scouts here in Durham who worked with Mr. Bryant, Dr. James Schooler, Jr.
Well, it's a privilege for me to be able to come before you this afternoon and speak about some of the things that I know about Mr. Bryant and our mutual experiences. Of course, he was a member of White Rock Baptist Church as I grew up there. But my first close encounter with Mr. Bryant came as part of the Boy Scout program. In those days, back in the 50s, the Boy Scouts even were segregated. And so we had an African-American section of the Boy Scouts and the white section of the Boy Scouts. And Mr. Bryant and my father were among the people who were in charge of the black area. And that was not the way that I was really directly connected with him. It was that as we pursued the effort to become Eagle Scouts, we had to achieve certain merit badges, and we needed counselors to supervise and test us for those merit badges. And so Mr. Bryant was one of the few people that I was aware of in Durham that I could approach to help me get one of my or more of my 21 merit badges that I need for the Eagle Scout rank. So that was my connection with him and the Boy Scouts. I knew that in addition to what I've already told you, that he did serve as a scoutmaster at other places during the subsequent years, and he took scouts to the Jamboree, which I was privileged in attending one time. But Mr. Bryant, you've been a great scouter, and I want to thank you on behalf of all the boys who benefited from your inspiration and your service, your help.
I want to make sure that we distinguish the lines between the professional journalists who are here covering this event from a professional standpoint. But two things have been said that make me want to at least make sure that we acknowledge. One is there's been a mention of Louis Alston, and his grandson, Kenneth Edmonds, is here. Who is the current editor of the Carolina Times. And I also want to talk about the fact that Mrs. Fawcett, was mentioned, and there is Jim Wise, who is here, who just a couple of weeks ago, or was it last week? A couple of weeks ago, I think, who actually gave a presentation here about some of the founding mothers and fathers of Durham beyond the normal ones, and he mentioned in his presentation Mrs. Fawcett. So that was a wonderful connection. So even though they can continue to do their professional duties, I did want to mention the work that they had done. I also mentioned a few minutes ago that I was going to call on my friend Don Moffitt to come up. He is one of the strongest advocates about making sure that the lights on the R. Kelly Bryant pedestrian bridge are always there. So I'm going to ask him if he would come up just for a moment and talk a little bit about that. And he doesn't have to make anything strong. I want to say hello to his daughter Izzy over there and ask Don if he would come forward. And there's another person that I want to be, when you are at bat, then you have what sometimes people call on the on-deck circle. So Virginia Williams, get ready. You're up next.
You'll have to excuse me for a moment. This is totally off the cuff. Eddie surprised me with this. I'm delighted to be up here, but we've been, Izzy and I have been around events, Open Streets over on Driver Street today, and Juneteenth celebrations. I'm not quite dressed to be up here. Delighted to be able to express my appreciation for all the work that Mr. Bryant has done, and to tell you a little bit about the bridge. As you all know, the Durham Freeway did so much damage. It's so many communities that were destroyed or divided. Mr. Bryant, though, has always seen challenges and opportunities, and he's worked hard as an advocate for the new footbridge to connect both sides of the Durham Freeway, north and south in East Durham. And more than that, of course, it serves as a gateway to the city. And so I know that you'll agree that it's only fitting that it's actually named for R. Kelly Bryant. And as Eddie was saying, it had pretty blue lights on it, and they broke, and it's been embarrassing. But if all goes well, in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, knock on wood, we'll see those lights back on again. They'll be a little different, so that they actually should stay on this time, but I think they'll come on. Now, the other reason why it's fitting is that Mr. Bryant, and I don't know if you have do you have anybody speaking about open space and trails? No. So the other reason why it's fitting is that Mr. Bryant's always been an advocate for trails and for open space and for making places for people to get out and walk and exercise. And he's he was a long-time member of the Durham Open Space and Trails Commission here for some 25 years. And that's a debt that we all have, there's many, many places all over Durham in all parts that have benefited from his leadership in that way. And I just want to appreciate you and thank you for that. Thank you. I owe you now, man.
No, I owe you. Thank you so much, Don. And Ellen Reckow, I think, has worked with Mr. Bryant on that open space and other kinds of projects along the way. Virginia Williams is here. Where is she? Oh, there she is. Outstanding, iconic historical person here in Durham. Many of you know that even though the sit-ins that we saw happen in Greensboro in 1960 became very, very famous, and a lot of movements came about because of that. There was a sit-in that was held right here in Durham, the Royal Ice Cream sit-in, and we had the pleasure of being in the presence of someone who was one of those Royal Seven. So Virginia, would you come up for just a minute and to talk? Not so much about the sit-in, but about the work that Mr. Bryant did to try to make sure that that sit-in was recognized.
Yeah, I would like to let everybody in here know that when you ride down Roxbury Street and you see the marker at the corner of Roxbury and Dallas Street, the marker didn't just get there by itself. And nobody volunteered and say, oh, we're going to put it there. There, ladies and gentlemen, is the driving force that put the marker there. Because Mr. Bryant had been writing letters and trying to get a marker there for years, and they were rejecting his letter, and he'd write more letters, and they would reject more, and I don't think he understood what it meant by rejecting his letters, because the more they rejected him, the more letters he wrote. And finally, the membership on the board changed, and they had new members on the board, and he sent another letter, and they granted an audience with with him. I think they thought he was coming by himself. But anyway, he called me and he said, Lynn, we've got an audience with them, and Lynn wants you and me to ride over there with us. I said, okay. So they told us, but when we got there, there was a committee there. There was Dr. Allison there, Carolyn Harris was there, John Self, Senator McKissick came. So it was a committee there, and we went before the committee. I think Mike Hill was acting as chairman of that committee. He had already sent them information, and they were aware of the hassle that had gone on, plus the importance of it, I guess. So before he could finish calling for the question, everybody on that committee raised their hands in favor of the marker. And of course, we had a chance to address them. I had a chance to meet with them and thank them, Mr. Bryant and Lynn, and I think Dr. Allison said a few things. And that is how the marker got there, by hard work, whole lot of letters. I don't know if he was sending emails or whether he started out writing, but whatever it was, he worked. It worked because he would not give up. And that is the reason that the marker is there. So today, on behalf of the Royal Seven, and there were 7 of us, it's not my story, it's the Royal Seven. We want to thank you, Mr. Bryant. We thank the support of the City of Durham and Mr. Kelly Bryant. We thank you. We know how the marker got there. So if you haven't seen it, when you leave here, hit Roxborough Street and go down there across, and it crosses Dowd Street. You will see the marker that we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to ask Lynn Richardson to come up in just a minute to talk about not only her going over to Raleigh with them. In fact, I think you transported Ms. Williams and Mr. Bryant over there. But we went to, and Lynn's going to also talk about Mr. Bryant's contribution to the North Carolina collection. But before we do that, I'd like to ask Ivan Owens, who was, here he is. I think he has a connection here with the Boy Scouts, so please come up, and shortly after you get done, I'll ask Lynn to come up, and then we'll open up for any further comments. Thank you so much indeed.
Good afternoon. It's certainly a privilege and an honor to say a few words about my mentor and my Boy Scout leader, Kelly Bryant. I was a member of Troop 187 at Burton School, where he was a Cub Scout. He was a Boy Scout leader. And I just want to thank him for the impressions that he made on thousands of men's lives. Over the years, we have had reunions where a lot of boys come back to celebrate Mr. Bryant. They're all over the world. He has touched their lives. They're doing well, and I just want to thank him for that. I can remember we went camping, and we went outside learning how to start a fire without a match. We pitched a tent. We studied the sky, the stars. At that age, he taught us constellations: Little Dipper, Big Dipper, North Star, Hercules. Can you imagine young kids knowing the constellations? This was in the 5th and 6th grade I was in when I was a member of his troop. He was a good friend of my father. he achieved the highest award that scouting has, and that is the Silver Beaver Award. Along with my father, they were good friends. And I just wanted, I would be sad if I could not say a few words. And really, I came to read a poem that I wrote on his behalf when he was honored at the NAACP back in the 80s, early 80s. I don't know if he remembers that. And I searched my house low and high, and I could not find that poem. So you're probably safe that you will not hear a poem from me, because I am no poet. But I was that impressed with Mr. Bryant that I felt like I had to write a poem. And since I couldn't find it, I'll just let you know the title of the poem, because it was a play on the words. You know, Mr. Bryant is a short, sort of short, but he's a great stature. He casts a large shadow. And the title of the poem was A Great Man of Large Stature. Thank God for Kelly Bryant. He was heaven sent.
Thank you, Mr. Owens. I think it's significant that we ask Lynn Richardson to come forward. And as she's coming forward, let me just mention that Tom Krakauer, who's sitting right behind her, talked about how he knew that Mr. Bryant was fond of collecting autographs of different people, and that he gave Mr. Bryant an autograph of one of the Little Rock Nine. And of course, Mr. Bryant has made all kinds of presentations with some of the very famous people who he has collected autographs from over the years and collected from. But Lynn has lots of information about some of the things that Mr. Bryant's collection has offered as a repository for some of that work. And she's going to talk about how Mr. Bryant's legacy will just continue to prosper and blossom through the work of the North Carolina collection here at the Durham County Library. Lynn is fond of saying that she is all Durham all the time, and that's what she's doing. And this is what Mr. Bryant has been, all Durham all the time. Thank you,
Lynn. What comes to mind when you think about preserving Durham history? The North Carolina collection at the Durham County Library, of course, right? No question about that. People like Gene Anderson, who wrote the book on Durham history. Jim Wise, who's here, has written books, done a lot of speaking about our history. Eddie Davis, you may not know this, but he goes about quietly researching, speaking about, and promoting Durham history. He's done some great talks for the library. And we think of organizations like Hayti Heritage Center, the Museum of Durham History. We have Katie Spencer, the director, here today, and our local universities. And of course, way up on that list is our guest of honor today, Mr. R. Kelly Bryant. Mr. Bryant has not only preserved Durham history, he has been an integral part of making Durham history. He spent his summers, I think I understand this correctly, he didn't grow up in Durham. We know he grew up in Rocky Mount, but he spent his summers here with his grandparents and then moved here permanently in the early 1940s. In 1944, he was hired by North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance, where he remained until he retired. He has many noteworthy history-related activities and accomplishments. You know, we've heard about some of the really important ones today. His 37 years as a Scoutmaster, where he not only helped raise these boys, but worked tirelessly to bring equality to scouting. Secretary-Treasurer of the Black Solidarity Committee for Community Improvement. That was the largest and most successful boycott in Durham history in '68 and '69. It did bring about a lot of changes in Durham. He was, as Virginia Williams told us, the driving force behind that historical marker commemorating Royal Ice Cream. We were so delighted. You know, that's proven to be kind of a seminal event for other people who went on to do the Greensboro sit-in. So pleased to have that marker. And he's a lifelong member of the NAACP. Well, I became librarian for the North Carolina collection in 2001, and Mr. Bryant and I first actually worked together in 2003 when we were on the Durham Civil Rights Heritage Project together, along with Barbara Lau and some other people here. And I found him then and since to be just a willing and so generous resource, a helper and a guide to me and to so many others who've been involved in Durham's history. I mean, he gave me permission to give out his name. If somebody came in and needed something that he might have, it was okay for me to call him. And often he would meet people at the library, or I think maybe they would come to his house, just incredibly generous with his knowledge and his time. His papers in the Durham County Library's North Carolina collection include approximately 2,500 funeral programs and obituaries. And this is just a treasure trove of biographical information for Durham. I can't tell you how often I pull these things out. It's just a real point of pride to have this wonderful resource for people to use. We've also got materials related to his life and work in Durham, including his involvement in social and professional and alumni organizations, his longtime involvement with the Boy Scouts, and his work on the historically African American Gear Cemetery and other cemeteries in Durham, which you've heard about. He continues to donate materials to the library, and we look forward to preserving and making available his entire collection of materials for researchers and lovers of history, not only for use today, but of course for many years in the future. I have a story to tell you. It's not about materials, but it's my favorite Kelly Bryant story, and I think it really exemplifies who he is. I hope I can do this without crying, so bear with me. A man came into the North Carolina collection several years ago, and he was looking to do research on the Hayti neighborhood. And I don't remember how we started talking, how Mr. Bryant came up. Probably I showed him some of the funeral programs or something. And he said Mr. Bryant was my scoutmaster. And then the guy and I kind of hit it off, and he started telling me, he said, I grew up in one of the housing projects, low-income housing. My dad wasn't around, and it was kind of rough and tough at times. And you could tell he had grown up, he had to be a really fine person. And he said, I will never forget Mr. Kelly Bryant. He taught me how to be a man. And I will never forget that as long as I live. I think that's the greatest tribute of all. So, So I just want to say thank you, Mr. Bryant, for all the ways you've helped the North Carolina collection carry out its mission to preserve and make available Durham history, and for your many contributions to that history and to our community.
I think it may be fitting if he is willing to share a word or two to ask Mr. Bryant, our honoree of today's program, if he would like to say anything at all about what has been said, or anything that we've left out, or anything that we need to talk about in terms of your legacy. Mr. Bryant, would you honor us with just a word or two? Doesn't have to be long.
Is that okay?
Thank you. I don't know what to say. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, as I look back to my early days in Rocky Mount and in Durham, I find that I'm doing a lot of things that I didn't realize the circumstances in which I was doing them. But I just did them. Got somebody else to help me. And I got a lot of folks who helped, and I'm sure that I must have helped about a lot of people too.
I didn't do this by myself. It took you too. And we are very proud of what we've done. And I'm sitting here thinking about what I wanted to say, and now I look like I want to just end and say thank you, because you've come to a point that you have appreciated what I was doing and what others were doing to make Durham a better place in which to live. We try to determine what's caused me to do some things. And the best that I can come up with is that my father, R. Kelly Bryant Sr., received a letter that I have from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People that was saying to him that you can't do better for black children unless we help you. But it turned out that the letter was trying to tell him that you don't dress Boy Scouts up in uniforms in the city of Rocky Mount or Durham. And this was back in 1919. I was about a couple of years old. And they discouraged him in every way that they could. In 1946, I was attending a meeting in Goldsboro, North Carolina, with Mr. Baldwin and some others for the Boy Scouts of America. And they announced that there were now black scouts in Durham. And I had to hit the floor to tell them they'd been in Durham all the time. And it was discouraging to us that these boys were scouts, but they weren't recognized. And Mr. Schooler, this young gentleman's father here, was the chairman of what was called the Division of the Boy Scouts of America, of Durham. White people were in what was called a district and had representation on the council and had special programs, had camps, and had all these sort of things, and we didn't. But we kept this tight. We wrote letters to President Eisenhower and the Congress of the United States and a whole lot of other people, and got this thing going to a point that in 1940, 1960, I don't know what it was, anyway, they changed it from a division to a district like everybody else. And it's been operating like that ever since. But at one time, our boys were participating in what was called a Scoutorama. And our goal was to ride bicycles skillfully. Where in the Boy Scout books is there anything about a bicycle? So when they had the next one, we told them we were going to ride bicycles, but we came dressed in Indian suits and put on the Indian dances, the order of arrow for the boys like everybody else. So much so that a camera operator and the cameraman over at Raleigh pushed over a expensive TV camera trying to get us on the screen to show them that the blacks could do the same thing that anybody else could do it. And we had boys going around the world. We had boys on the naval. I carried boys on the naval ship down to Air Force Base and the airplanes. And we just did everything else that anybody else. We went to Cameron, New Mexico, and I carried some of the schoolers and some of the other boys to the 1953 World Jamboree in California. And we've been, well, I don't want to take a lot of time talking about these things, But I want to say this to you. Thank you again. I was proud of participating, and I'm proud of what you have done for me today. But I want you to know, too, that I know I had help from some of you sitting right here to help to get these things across. And we've got much more work to do now. Thank you.
So much, Mr. Bryant. Thank you so much.
I know that there are lots of stories that could be told, but I would just like for certain groups of people just to stand for just a moment. Would the family members of Mr. Bryant please just stand so we can acknowledge you? And I'm sorry that Mrs. Otelia Bryant could not be here, but other members of the Bryant family, would you just stand, please? Would the members of any affiliate of the Masonic Lodge and all of its umbrella organizations, would you just please stand, please? And would the members of the White Rock Baptist Church please stand? And one final group, and I see Mrs. Mason over here. Anyone who ever voted at Burton Elementary School, would you please stand?
Yeah, nobody mentioned that about him.
Thank you so much. I don't know if we have time for any further remarks from anyone who might want to say a word or two before we close the program. I know we have refreshments over here, and some of you may want to individually greet Mr. Bryant, but if there's any burning remark that needs to be made, Lynn has the microphone.
Raise your hand. No. Okay.
I would just like to say in brief, I thank God for Mr. Kelly Bryant. I'm one of the people that work with him at Burton School. My name is Nancy Mason, and I've never met a man like Mr. Bryant. He was wisdom. Whatever we needed, it was there. And I tell my kids, I'll say, Mr. Bryant this and Mr. Bryant that. Who is Mr. Bryant? I said, Mr. Bryant is wisdom. If you need to talk to somebody that you need to know something, he is just great. And I thank you, Mr. Bryant. Burton School loves you. We miss you. I love you. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Bryant. This is Dean Jernigan. We worked together with the Durham Business and Professional Chain back in the 1990s. And I just want to thank you for just all the words of wisdom. What I found and learned from Mr. Bryant was that when we would work on projects together, he always turned it into a learning experience. You know, I was a staffer, and the new way of thinking was you were just project-oriented. There was a task, there was a goal, something to be completed. But for Mr. Bryant, it was just an experience. And somehow he always took the opportunity to weave in some type of historical context to what we were doing. And it just made me appreciate Durham so much more. I wasn't from Durham. I came here to attend North Carolina Central University. Dr. Schooler, Dr. Fitz, I saw some of our old professors over there. So it just became a pleasure to learn and to just be engaged. And so in many cases, it doesn't matter what the project was, it just became an enjoyable experience just to be around. And then when I left the chain and I came back, I needed something for a Black History project at my church. And so the first person I called was Kelly Bryant. And he introduced me to this wonderful film, Negro Durham Marches On, that just sort of blew me away. So Mr. Bryant, thank you so much for just the encouragement, the inspiration, and everything that you've done to help not only me, but all of Durham. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Lyons. I'm past master beds on the lodge in 825. Same lodge that my brother, R. Kelly Bryant Jr. was past master of, and one of the original members that formed that lodge. It's offspring from Dork Lodge number 28. Only thing I can say about Mr. Bryant is that he's a man on fire. Was and still is. He's a man with fortitude, a man with inspiration, a man to be reckoned with, and a man full of energy. When I first met Mr. Bryant, I was coming into the Boy Scouts, and we were meeting at the Camp Marie where we heard some, talk about. And I didn't know that he was a scoutmaster. He was short, just like all the other scouts, till I found out. But then again, like I said, he was a man that had more energy than anything else. The gentleman that spoke earlier here about, the things that he taught you are things that you just don't commonly know. You don't grow up, those things are not taught in the household, for one. You didn't know it till you had someone like Mr. Bryant to teach it to you. So, Brother Bryant, I'll say to you that it has always been a pleasure to be in your company and in your midst. You keep up the good work. You know where your house is, eternal in the heavens.
Thank you. My name is Rita Bryant. I'm his daughter-in-law, but the relationship today and the years gone by has surpassed the in-law stage. He's a father, a second father to me, and I am a daughter to him. It has been stated that people don't have to be kind, and when they are, they don't have to be kind to you. And so it is with Grandpa. We call them the family. This man has sown so much into my life. I remember 30-some years ago when I first met him, he reminded me of the cartoon character Papa Smurf. And not because he was blue or anything like that, but because Papa Smurf was busy. He was always about doing something. And so it is with this man right here. I remember when the first grandchild was born, my oldest son. I remember him telling Keith that, boy, I'm going to live to see you graduate from high school. And I'm thinking, man, you kind of old already, young. But here it is, years later, he's still here. God is such an awesome God. He has graced the family with the presence of not just Grandpa, but Grandma too. I mean, I don't know what it is, but that 90-something generation, that's a powerful generation. And I've been blessed just to be in their presence. I am grateful to have him in my life. And I mean, God is just awesome. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
I think one last statement from Mr. Ballantyne over here. And Mr. Ballantyne, while the mic is coming to you, would anyone who was involved in that solidarity movement or any of the civil rights struggles here in Durham, would you just stand? I know that a lot of you are around here. A fitting closing from Mr. James Ballantyne.
Well, thank you. I'm James Ballantyne, along with my wife and other members of the Martin Luther King Day Steering Committee. We want to thank Mr. Bryant for his 25 years for being our treasurer. And we just like to say thank you so much, Mr. Bryant.
And this is the Civil Rights Reunion that's held every year.
Every year.
That's
we
right.
hold it every year. I mean, wait, Civil Rights. Years ago.
All right.
And
Very good.
And we like to thank him for that.
thank you all very much. Thank you for being here, and I'm sorry, Dr. Fitz. Dr. Howard Fitz.
Yeah, well, the kinds of things that he was doing. I would like to hear somebody make a statement about Artelia and her role in this life of Kelly Bryant and what he has done.
All I can say is this right here. It has been stated, behind every good man there's a great woman. And she is that he called her Madam Chairman, I think. And Grandma is doing fine. She has, those days, but she is still strong, and she can still tell you whatever she need to tell you. She was the pillar behind him, actually, because while he was out and about, she was taking care of home and taking care of the family. And so, yeah, thank you so much. I apologize.
Clem?
You're the last.
Yeah, thank you. Ed, I'm sorry.
It's okay, Clem. Go ahead, Clem. Introduce yourself.
My name is Clem Baines, and I was co-chairman of the Durham Civil Rights Workers Committee. But I don't want to speak about just one aspect of my experience with Kelly Bryant, a gentle soldier. There are those who are here now that know about the history of Durham and the things that have transpired in Durham and the involvement, the significant, but also the things that may not have been significant. This gentleman here moved about just about everything, was involved in everything that went on in Durham that had significance, but he was quiet about it and lent his wisdom to it. I go back to, there were times when Ben and John and all of the individuals that I it'll take all day to talk about in terms of our involvement in Durham, about the major kinds of things that took place in Durham during that period of the 60s. But this gentleman here goes back with me to Rocky Mount, because my mother's side of people come from Rocky Mount, and the Bryants they were there in Rocky Mount. But also in Hampton, because my father went to Hampton. And of course, this gentleman here went to Hampton. And it was a time that we would spend, that we would just get an arrangement where we could get Mr. Bryant to sit down and get him talking. And he could tell you stories that would just captivate you, and just were things that you had no idea of, things that took place and how he was able to do it. One was, how did he go to school at Hampton when his family sources of income was very, very meager, but he came up with an idea as to how he would go to school. So I just think that it's fantastic and it's spectacular that we were able to pay tribute to this gentleman here, because he has had so many things that he's been involved in. If anybody knows about FIRST, there's a group that started, they had boats, and they were the first black organization that were able to monitor and look after waterways in North Carolina, because they went and became certified to be able to do that. All kinds of things
that gentleman right there was involved in. So I just want to say it's a tribute, and we thank you so very much. We've been so blessed to have you, and we hope that you will have many more days. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Clem. And you mentioned a John and Ben, and I think most people know that you were talking about Ben Ruffin and John Edwards. And the waterways you talked, there's a whole story that Frank Stesno, who does the State of Things, spent a conversation with Mr. Bryant, and that has been archived, and they talked a great deal about an incident up at Carr Lake, and Mr. Bryant's advocacy for civil rights on the waterways. So thank you all very much. Please feel free to enjoy the refreshments. Thank you to the Durham County Library for all that you've done, and thank you, Mr. Bryant.
What you up to?